Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I trust the week's gone well. I'm going to be off again now from Tuesday. I'll be in Dubai. I'm looking forward to that. If you haven't had a chance to have a look at the interview I did with Bob Collymore earlier this week, we covered lots of items, brand delight, a large part of Safaricom's equity value is created by this brand delight score, where it ranks 30 percentage points higher than any other comparable brand, and it creates tremendous loyalty. And I think that's why a lot of people who've decided to go head to head have not succeeded, because of the equity of that brand. The mobile internet revolution we also covered. I thank Bob again for that interview, and I'll put up a photograph of his office whilst he was out of it as we were setting up. Macro thoughts, as I said on the 29th of September, the point I'm making is that the dollar has just started getting going. There will be blood in the water. There is a small window if you want to be one of the sharks. The dollar ranks as the single best performing major currency against its 16 peers for the past week, month and year to date, according to Bloomberg data. On that note, I'll also put up an image of the Department of the Treasury in Washington, which is where they were printing all the money, and I took it 915 days ago when the printing press was in full flight. Of course, at the end of this month there'll be no more QE. Home thoughts. What matters in life is not what happens to you, but what you remember and how you remember it. And I think that's really key, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I think so many people either have a very sort of negative way of looking at past events, or a very positive way, and especially if you have a positive and a negative relationship, it's pretty tricky. The trouble with our lives is that the future is not what it used to be. Paul Valery. Well, that was quite clever as well. And I'm still with the Hong Kong crowds. I'm remembering Benghazi. I'm remembering all these crowds that mill around this new world of ours, and take me back to Don DeLillo, and the future belongs to crowds, he said in Mao too. If Hong Kong succeeds, then other cities in China will try to act as Hong Kong people do. In coping with the spread of dissent, one favourite strategy of security forces has been cutting off the head of the serpent, in which the government arrests top organisers and puts them behind bars. Environmental activist Wu Lihong, who fought to clean up China's largest freshwater lake, got a 3-year sentence in 2007, even as the government ordered more than 1,000 polluting factories near the lake to shut down. This year, the government made use of the same strategy against the Uyghur, a Muslim minority group, Ilham Tohti, who's a moderate scholar whom the government considered too influential among Uyghurs, upset religious repression. He received a life sentence for allegedly preaching separatism. Hong Kong police drew a line on occupation of buildings. Apparently, some organisers have threatened to escalate their actions by surrounding government buildings. Hui Chun-tak, Chief Superintendent of the Police Public Relations Branch, told reporters today, police will not tolerate any illegal surrounding of government buildings. The police urges protesters to remain calm and show restraint. Around 4 p.m, police were seen carrying boxes and canisters into the government complex, with at least one box labelled as containing tear gas. And I think, and I'll put up an image of Hong Kong, and I think the new strategy, because I did listen to the live feed of Leung Chun-ying, was to bore the protesters into submission, because his delivery and his tone was, just that boring. And I think Leung Chun-ying is basically offering talks with protesters as he refuses to accept calls for him to resign. And my view is the Chinese will talk real tough. They will create tension like they did yesterday when those images flew around social media of tear gas and so forth. But surely will not use a hammer to crack this particular nut. Put up an image of Ebola, another one of it magnified several 100,000 times by an electric microscope, interestingly, of course. there are more than 3,000 deaths in Africa, and it barely registered in the States. You get one incident, and of course it's all about Ebola, which is quite interesting in terms of the skew, the media skew that we have in the world today. Under a section entitled Mode of Transmission, the original text, this is from the Canadian Health Authority, stated that airborne spread among humans is strongly suspected, although it has not yet been conclusively demonstrated. Both passages refer to a 2012 study by Canadian scientists which indicated that the Ebola virus could be transmitted by air between different species. Researchers from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the country's public health agency have shown that pigs infected with this form of Ebola can pass the disease on to macaques without any direct contact between the species. Although there is no confirmation, this is a report from some time ago, that Ebola has gone airborne, Michael T. Osterholm, director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota, acknowledged in a recent New York Times op-ed, and this is key, that virologists are loath to discuss openly but are definitely considering in private the possibility that Ebola has gone airborne. And then, yesterday, the United Nations said Ebola could become airborne, warns of nightmare scenario. Anthony Banbury, the Secretary General's Special Representative, said that aid workers are racing against time to bring the epidemic under control, in case the Ebola virus mutates and becomes even harder to deal with. The longer it moves around in human hosts in the virulent melting pot that is West Africa, the more chances increase that it could mutate, he told the Telegraph. It is a nightmare scenario that it could become airborne, and unlikely, but it can't be ruled out. And I think given the unprecedented degree of mutation, that tail risk of it going airborne is no longer, it's exponentially increasing as well. Of course, I participated with Laura Kyle in an Inside Story some time ago about Ebola, where I was talking about its non-linear and exponential characteristics and the fact that it was still gaining velocity. And I think I was quite prescient in what I said. I sort of poo-pooed the WHO's 20,000 figure number at that time. I'll put up an image of a hand can be seen holding a thermometer at the Ivy Apartments, where a man diagnosed with the Ebola virus was staying in Dallas, Texas, October 2nd. A man passes a bag delivered by the Red Cross in the North Texas Food Bank into the apartment unit at the Ivy Apartments complex, where a man diagnosed with the Ebola virus was staying in Dallas, Texas. Apparently, the US Ebola patient's waste was not cleared from the apartment for 2 days. And I'll put up an image of police standing watch at the Ivy Apartments, where Ebola patient Thomas Eric Duncan was staying in Dallas. I like this photograph that Vice News tweeted, "Night clubbing in Beirut, the fact that Hezbollah is next door is why we party so hard." Interesting piece in the Bloomberg, Islamic State leads Mideast into warlord era as nations dissolve. The Middle East may be sliding toward a warlord era, with nation-states increasingly struggling to control all their territory and millions living under the rule of emergent local chiefs and movements. Armed irregular forces hold effective power over growing areas of Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, where central government authority barely reaches. Motivated by religious ideology or regional separatism, they have grabbed oil facilities and weapons, imposed taxes or changed school curriculums, and fought each other as well as national armies. It is almost like the whole regional order that was built in the 20th century is collapsing. Non-state actors are filling the vacuum, and I completely agree. And of course, Oded Yinon refers to exactly this risk, which is now occurring in front of us. Obama lost faith in Pearson after elevator lapse, and as I said yesterday, I think it's a very deliberate message that is being sent to President Obama. Very deliberate indeed. Euro 126.58 bounced a little, well, it's definitely bounced off a low, 125.71 on September 30th. Dollar index 85.75, I think we're going to run higher again. Japanese yen 108.81. A little bit of a bounce after falling 1.1% in the preceding two sessions. The yen has dropped 5.1% in September against the dollar. Biggest monthly decline since January 2013. Swissy 0.9548, pound 161.35, Aussie 0.8792, India rupee 61.414, South Korean won, that's moved dramatically, 1061.20, Rial 249.53, Egyptian pound steady as you like, 714.94, South African rand 1120.80. The dollar has jumped 6.5% in the past 3 months and is the best performer among 10 developed nation currencies. Yen down 0.6% and euro down 1.7%. Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index headed for a 7th weekly gain, longest run since June 2010. I am evidently a dollar bull. I'll put up a 3-month chart. US employers are expected to have added 215,000 workers in September, up from 142,000 on the previous month. But the point is, whether it happens now or whether it's going to happen, it's going to happen where we're going to get a massive sticker shock, a very big number print, and we're going to see a huge rally in the dollar, I think. Euro dollar 126.58 jumped as much as 0.6%, got as high as 126.99, but then it's come off, and that was on Draghi, and obviously it's trading around what he's saying. It's passing his linguistics. Gold 3-month chart 12.12725. I think it's headed a lot lower. Touched 1204.57 on September 30th, which was the lowest since January 2nd. Crude oil traded below $90, last at $91.62. There's a lot of thinking going on, particularly around the supply of oil, and Bloomberg picked up on it. OPEC price war signaled by Saudi move risks deeper drop. Saudi Arabia is signaling that it's ready for a price war with other OPEC members that would deepen oil's biggest slump in more than 2 years, according to Commerzbank and Citigroup. Saudi Aramco, the state-run oil producer, the world's biggest exporter, cut prices on October 1st for all its exports, reducing those for Asia to the lowest since 2008. The move suggests that the biggest member of the OPEC exporting countries is prepared to let prices fall rather than cede market share by paring output to clear a supply surplus, according to Commerzbank. There is no indication whatsoever that the Saudis are going to put a floor into this market. Saudi market share in Asia is really under assault. It is a price war. The Saudis will win, but it won't be painless. Some calculate that Saudi Arabia is working with the US to wrestle the price lower and exert pressure on Russia. You've got to keep it. We've got lots of moving parts there. 88.50 is the key support area. Let's see how it behaves. Emaar malls rise as much as 21% in biggest Dubai IPO in 7 years. Unit of the UAE's biggest listed developer, Emaar Properties, climbed to as high as 3.5 dirhams, trading at 3.27 dirhams when this report was filed. Dubai's benchmark DFM General Index is the second best performer in the world this year, and it's up 47% in 2014. Emaar's Mall's unit listing is the second in 8 days on Dubai's exchange. I'll put up a photograph of the Burj Khalifa. It took 168 days ago, and remind you of that article I wrote in February where I said Dubai is the real transit state, a connection point in an interconnected century. Coming to Sub-Saharan Africa, US Africa Command, this is Martin Plaut in The New Statesman, and I think he's right. The US Africa Command will set up a joint force command headquarters in Liberia to support US military activities and help coordinate expanded US and international relief efforts to fight the West Africa Ebola outbreak. $1 billion, code-named Operation United Assistance, and I think it allows the US to insert military hard power into these areas. Sudan has arrested scores of activists, lawyers and journalists over the past 2 weeks in a crackdown coinciding with the anniversary of massive protests against the lifting of fuel subsidies. Activists and right groups said Wednesday. And you will remember nearly 200 people were killed during the demonstrations a year ago. South Africa all shares up only 4.1789% in 2014. It's fallen 4,000 points since closing at a record of 52,242 on the 29th of July. Dollar rand little bit firm, 11.20. I'll put up a chart, but I think there's a risk if we see another round of dollar strength. This heads towards 12. Egyptian pound really has been a safe haven. It has barely budged all year. 7.15 last. The Egyptian stock market is at multi-year highs, up 43.42%, just shy of 10,000. Nigerian all shares languishing at 16-week lows, down 0.4694% year to date. Javier Blas tweeted that for the first time in 40 years, the US has stopped buying Nigerian oil. July exports fell to zero. Further commentary informs us that India has been taking up the slack. Abubaker Shekau popped up. Here I am alive. I will only die the day Allah takes my breath, he said. Nothing will kill me until my days are over. I'm still alive. Some people asked you if Shekau has two souls. No, I have one soul, by Allah, he said, apparently reading from a script. In the video, Abubaker Shekau says his fighters shot down an Air Force jet that went missing 3 weeks ago, and that is a serious development, I would have thought. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index 3-week lows, up 3.0769% this year. But interestingly, Ghana is claiming the best bond rally on IMF. Ghanaian and Zambian dollar debt outperformed emerging market peers in the third quarter as aid talks with the International Monetary Fund spurred pledges of better fiscal management. Ghanaian securities returned 4.9% in the 3 months through September. And I said in several interviews that all he had to do was dial up Christine Lagarde, and he has, and you had a positive reaction. I'll put up a photograph of myself, Hannah and Christine Lagarde, and also the link for our MindSpeak session. Isabel dos Santos has increased her stake in Angolan bank Banco BIC to 42.5%. This is from the Portuguese newspaper Publico. I like this photograph from Thomas Amter, who of course I took a selfie with earlier in the week, from Windsor North Port and Lake Ferries Terminal. It's an Instagram photograph, I hope you can see it. Jane Corbyn has created enormous conversation and furore on social media. This is regarding the BBC Two's Rwanda's Untold Story. And, it's an interesting piece of journalism. Have a look at it. President Kagame, I have a very high regard for. 25th of August, I mentioned that he said when he was in Washington, the markets are never wrong. On August 5, at the US-Africa Summit, and I said there was no sharper signal delivered in Washington than those 5 words that President Kagame uttered. Picking up the signal through the noise of our world in 2014 is no easy thing. And I was saying that was a very sharp signal. Ambassador Power, just as this furore is taking off, tweets, in DRC, must start seeing credible evidence of surrenders immediately or FDLR should face military action. And I thought that was interesting, the coincident sequencing of its timing, given that previous report by Corbyn. Of course, 1,138 days ago, I was in Kigali for MindSpeak, and I put up a photograph of President Kagame and myself. This was at the Serena, and also put up a link for the MindSpeak session that we held at that time. And I also put up a photograph taken 110 days ago when I visited the Gabiro military barracks in Rwanda, which is really the heartbeat of the RPF movement, and it was an extraordinary visit, and I was the guest of the First Lady, Janet Kagame. I'll put up that photograph. Interesting report about how the HIV pandemic originated in Kinshasa in the 1920s. That's what scientists are saying. A perfect storm of urban change that began in 1920s Kinshasa led to the catastrophic spread of HIV across Africa and into the wider world. According to scientists who use genetic sequencing and historical records to trace the origins of the pandemic. Though the virus probably crossed from chimpanzees to humans in southern Cameroon years earlier, HIV remained a regional infection until it entered the capital of what is now the DRC. From the 1920s until 1960, the pandemic HIV strain, there were others that fizzled out, spread from Kinshasa, crossed borders to other nations, and ultimately landed on distant continents. It has infected nearly 75 million people worldwide to date. When the virus arrived, Kinshasa was bustling, the largest and fastest growing city in the region, with transport links reaching up and down the country. The busy Congo River curved north and east to Kisangani, more than 600 miles away. The railway carried scores of workers southeast to Katanga, a mining province reliant on immigrant labour, and on to Lubumbashi, more than 900 miles away. Records show that by the 1940s, more than 1 million people a year passed through Kinshasa on the railways alone. By 1960, the rate of new pandemic HIV infections outpaced the growth of the regional population, according to research published in Science. Pybus said, "It seems a combination of factors in Kinshasa in the early 20th century created a perfect storm for the emergence of HIV, leading to a generalized epidemic with unstoppable momentum that unrolled across sub-Saharan Africa." Coming to Kenya, I've got Ariel coming to see me in a minute, but she asked me some questions about rebasing, and she's put it in Christian Science Monitor. She was saying that, the GDP has been re-estimated to 53.3 billion. Dramatic increase will reduce Kenya's debt to GDP ratio and will, I think, lower borrowing costs. And I said, the biggest game changer in the last few years is the availability of money where it wasn't available before. I said there's an infrastructure gap that is as wide as the Grand Canyon. This will need to be financed. If you look at any kind of research, Kenya is seen as an outlying Africa in terms of the arrival of the information century. This rebasing was recognizing that component of our economy, M-Pesa, mobile internet. We rank top of the list in any way you care to look at it. I said the rebasing sends a strong message. We are the anchor, the pivot state of the East African community. There is scale here. It is the gateway to the region. But I said the economy is still fragile. It is a total disaster. We're talking about new taxes of up to 15% for some of our most popular products in Europe. This is Stephen Bithi, CEO of the Fresh Produce Exporters Association of Kenya. This basically means the retail prices to go up by at least a similar margin, which leaves us at a disadvantaged position. This is all to do with the trade agreement with the Europeans. BAT Kenya has rallied a total of 63.75% on a total return basis in 2014. It's at a record. It closed at a record yesterday. Shilling 89.25 area. We're holding in the Nairobi all-share 1.1% below a record high reached on the 23rd of September, plus 19.743% year to date. Of course, the top performing share has been Kenya Orchards, which is up 2,833%. Ewart via Twitter tells me that it's on average daily volume of 100 shares. True, something's not right. Perhaps a reverse takeover and subsequent listing. I think he's right. Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for Kenya bus attack that left 7 dead. The Nairobi all-share eased 0.6 points yesterday. NSE 20 eased 17.89 points yesterday. Equity turnover clocked more than $1 billion for the 3rd consecutive session. Kenya Orchard surged by its daily limit. Safaricom eased marginally. The big trade was in BAT, 0.56% of its shares trading, rallying 7.35%. Market is in a little bit of rotation here as it finds its feet. We've had some shares which have become very overextended, which need to come back. We need to see some rotation into underperforming shares. I think that will happen in the next few days. But it's well supported, and the bull is very much in charge. Once again, thank you for stopping by.